Hi, everyone. It's Diana, and hope you all had an awesome Memorial Day weekend. So, today's podcast will talk a little bit about adolescence and sports nutrition. So, being a mom myself and also someone in the nutrition space, I often get a lot of questions from my friends and everything saying, my son or daughter are playing sports, they're training 5 days a week, 2 hours a day. Should they be taking supplements, and what should they be taking? So today I welcome Dr. Robert Wildman. He has received his PhD from the Ohio State University, his Master's of Science from Florida State University, and his bachelor's from University of Pittsburgh. He is also a registered and licensed dietitian. Serving as the Senior Vice President of R&D and the Chief Science Officer of Dymatize over the previous decade, and also working for GNC, Melaleuca, Genesis Today, and Bally Total Fitness, Dr. Wildman has built and launched hundreds of food and dietary supplement products. He is currently principal at Demeter Consultants, a food and dietary supplement consulting agency, and is building Time, a performance nutrition brand that launches this summer. On top of that, Dr. Wildman has authored 4 books, including The Nutritionist, Food, Nutrition, and Optimal Health, Sports and Fitness Nutrition, Advanced Human Nutrition, Handbook of Nutraceuticals and Functional Foods, and has authored over 100 research papers, abstracts, and chapters. As a creator of the Nutritiondoctor.com and founder of the International Protein Board, he is a global renowned exercise, fitness, and nutrition expert and speaks around the world on exercise and sports nutrition, and continues to work with professional and elite athletes to achieve their highest level of performance, as well as health and fitness. So with that awesome background, I would love to welcome Dr. Wildman. Hi, Dr. Wildman.
Hi, Diana. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. So hope you had an awesome Memorial Day weekend.
I did. It was a little rainy here in Dallas, Texas, but it's always good to just have that weekend off.
Same. I know Jersey, it was a complete washout, but you know what? It's really great for just spending quality family time.
Yes.
So that said, with that extensive background, and you've been in the industry for quite some time now, would love for you to just tell our viewers like how you got into the industry, why you got in the industry, and just why you've been in it so long.
Well, I was academic for 9 years, and I was promoted and tenured. So I'm one of those wacky PhD academic types that once they're tenured, they actually leave academics. So I did, and I got pulled into industry by the Bally Total Fitness Corporation. I've had the fortunate career path to be able to couple science and education with building products and education and activation and building programs and so forth, and doing it in the United States and around the world. It's just been a fabulous experience, and it just continues to get better. Right now, I'm chair of the American Herbal Products Association Sport Nutrition Committee, and get to work with brands, suppliers, legal firms, just all kinds of different components of the industry, on an almost daily basis. And we get to work together and solve problems and just make a better industry, not only for our businesses, but most importantly for the end consumers. So it's very satisfying in that regard, in that, we really affect change that just makes it better for the consumer, all the way up to, us who are just, trying to build our brands and do the best that we can.
That's such a great background, and huge shout out to Appa. We love Appa here at What's Up with Supps. And I think that's really describes a lot of us, why we have that passion. It's just we're consumers at heart, and that's why we just love this industry. So given your awesome background, but also that you're a dad to adolescents, I thought you would be the perfect person to give our listeners a little background and some advice on food and or dietary supplements for young athletes. These athletes are active, and they often train like adults. Some of them are even bigger than adults, right? So what are your, what is your advice on what supplements that these adolescents should be taking and what their regimen should look like?
Well, I think one thing it's important to remember is that, a lot of what they do when they're teenagers and even a little bit younger is very similar to what we're doing as adults. You're engaging your skeletal muscle. You're having, relatively high metabolic outputs to perform the work on the field, during practices, during game situations, and so forth. And, so not only do you have to prepare for that, but you also have to recover from it. And if it's done long enough, then you also have to, accommodate it while you're performing. So it's, there's a lot of principles that are generally the same regardless of age. So, it's always important, especially, in the teenage years, to put nutrition in the proper focus, because not only are these young athletes, trying to be better at their sports, but also they're still growing and developing. And so not only do you have to, as a parent, you're looking at what's on their plates, and not only are you trying to feed and fuel them, so that they can recover and prepare for their next practice or their next game, but also because we know that they're still growing, their bones are getting longer and they're getting more dense and they're adding more mass to their bodies. And, so we have to accommodate that as well. So I think one of the most important things that I tend to see with a lot of younger athletes, especially female athletes, is, they can become a little bit image focused. And, sometimes they get very wrapped up in, almost undernourishing themselves during a competitive season. Maybe because it's, how they look compared to, their teammates, or how they look in their uniforms, or whatever it is. But it's important to remember that your best performance is based upon your best nutrition. So, it's sometimes a little bit of a challenge to get them to eat enough during season and not lose weight, which, can happen while they're in a competitive season. So, as a parent, I think it's important just to, be aware of what's going on with your young athletes that are in your house, and listen to them, listen to some of their cues, because sometimes, you can see it's either body language, or, you can see how they approach a meal that you may be having at dinner. And just watch and be encouraging and supportive, but at the same time, be aware of what may be happening. They're growing. So not only will they have enhanced needs for calories relative to their inactive, classmates and so forth, they're going to have higher protein requirements. They're going to need more fluid as well because of sweating. Okay. And, there's other nutrients that are enhanced too, that are going to be, helpful as well. So, I always want to make sure that whether it's my kids or, when I work with young athletes, that I always have them approach, there's a couple of key factors. I always have them approach each meal as, it's protein first. And then you want to include as much of the fuel foods relative to how active you are or how extensive the caloric expenditure is while you're performing your sports.
And I think, that's such a great answer. The one thing that you hit on, which I think is really something that we need to be mindful of, especially parents of young women, is about the under eating. And, I could tell you that just from firsthand. I was overtraining. My trainer will say this: I was overtraining, I wasn't eating enough, and I was expecting to grow muscle. And it wasn't happening because I had this image in my head that, more is better, more cardio is better, more HIIT is better. But if you want to grow muscle, you really need to slow down. And also you need the fuel to actually fuel the muscle growth. So since I started, eating more and focusing on rest and like actually eating more protein and calories, I'm actually, I gained 5 pounds and about 5 pounds of muscle. So definitely that's, you hit the nail right on the head. And, I think parents just really need to be attentive to their kids and watch, everything that they're doing. That's the hard part.
I think so. And, if you can convince them, if you can help them understand that, the actual muscle action, the energy expenditure, the efforts of the muscle, that's really going to create the caloric deficit for you. So let the exercise do the work. If you're looking to, maybe lean a little bit, let the exercise do it. Don't try to restrict it through calories. It's almost a recipe for disaster. The other thing that I think is a little bit complicated for a lot of young athletes is that they begin to manipulate their macros. And so they may try to restrict carbohydrate very aggressively because they've heard, or their friends are going keto, or whatever it is. But one thing is really important to remember, especially in high intensity types of sports, carbohydrate is still the primary fuel source for the muscle in those high intensity sports. So anything that's done at higher intensity for an extended period of time, they really need those muscle carbohydrate stores. So, they have to keep that in mind. And maybe there's some regimens that they can, play around with. But in general, they're just young and their body's still growing, and they're physically active, and their muscle wants to burn carbohydrate during high intensity efforts. Carbohydrate is actually their ally while they're younger and performing sports.
So you talked a little bit about nutrition and supplementation for young athletes. So what would you say your top 5 supplements would be for adults in general?
Well, I always like to encourage people to evaluate how much protein they're getting in their diet, first and foremost, to see if there's a need there to supplement. Because, a lot of people will get plenty of protein in their diet. But the harder you train, the harder, whatever your sport is, and, this could be cardiovascular driven, cycling, running, something like that. Or it can be, you're trying to build muscle mass, or maybe you're a sport athlete, a football player, lacrosse player, whatever it is. In some sports, you don't associate protein as much. And I see this a lot with like runners and cyclists because they become very carb focused. And so meals become very heavy carb. And then, when you add up the calories and when you add up the protein content, they're still not where they should be. So for those types of athletes, organizations like, the International Society of Sport Nutrition, they recommend between 1.4 and 2 grams per kilogram body weight. The International Protein Board, we recommend, anywhere between 1.4 to 1.8 for exercise and general conditioning, and then 1.8 to 2.2 for more extreme sports and extreme bodybuilding and muscle development. So your protein needs are at least double the RDA for people who train. And that's kind of a minimum. So more could actually be more beneficial, especially for those individuals as an adult who are trying to lean as they try to improve. So you made the point a little bit earlier, it's hard to undernourish and build muscle at the same time. But if you try to undernourish, or you try to create a caloric imbalance, a moderate one that's not overly aggressive, your protein needs not only need to meet your athletic needs, but they also need to be a little bit higher now because you're creating the caloric deficit. So protein is always the first one to make sure that you're getting that right. And, the name protein comes from Proteus, which means to come first. It should always be your first consideration. Protein is the structure and function of the athlete. Carbohydrate and fat are primarily the fuel which powers the athlete. So they're sort of separate in that regard. You can't think of protein as fuel. You really shouldn't think about carbohydrate or fat as structure and functional components. So they're kind of different that way. The other ones that I really like, creatine, especially for strength power athletes, for people who are weight training, men and women, creatine monohydrate is really the one that's been shown to be the most efficacious, nothing shown to be better. And also it's the least expensive. So hooray, for that. Other ones that I like, I like vitamin D. I think that caffeine, I'm a huge fan of caffeine. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about caffeine from a recommendation standpoint, but the ISSN, International Society of Sport Nutrition, just came out with new overviews of caffeine and caffeine consumption. And caffeine is another one of those nutrients that, I think for a lot of people can really make a difference, especially if it's part of a pre-workout product. Other ones that I do like fish oil. I like DHA and EPA. I especially like it for high impact athletes. I think you can't look past it for its involvement in brain health and possibly to aid and hasten the recovery process for somebody who's had a concussive head injury. So I think anybody who is involved with, collision oriented sports, and the easy ones to think of are sports like football and, lacrosse and hockey, ice hockey and so forth. But even sports like soccer can involve, that rapid movement of the brain where it sort of bounces into the inside of the cranium of the skull and so forth. So I think it's just a good recommendation just to have a couple of grams of a omega-3 fish oil base. Well, it doesn't have to be fish oil based, but of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids on a daily basis.
So you just named all the supplements I take. Yeah, I completely agree with all of those recommendations. So you touched a little bit upon creatine. So the next few questions, I just wanted you to just dispel some myths and truths. So creatine, I always hear, okay, take creatine before working out, take creatine while you're working out, take creatine after working out. So when is the best time to take creatine?
The research is going back and forth, but I'm just going to say take creatine in general. I've seen some work where after it might be a little bit more and then some before, but it's one of those investment nutrients that I think everybody just needs to take. And I think it's a lifelong nutrient as well. I think that we can begin the supplementation of creatine, somewhere in our teen years and take it throughout our lives, even for those people who aren't physically active later on in their lives, especially if they're restricting their creatine sources in their diet, which is primarily meats. Then supplementing with that nutrient is a wise thing to do, especially because of the potential benefit on the brain and the heart and other non-muscle tissue. So in and around the workout is maybe the best time to take it. There's certainly a lot of the early research that has combined it with a little bit of carbohydrate to aid the uptake of creatine into the muscle. It's the best thing just to think to yourself is, when will I be the most compliant to take it? So I think a lot of times, because when you think about when you supplement creatine, you don't take creatine and get immediate benefit. Even if you add it to a pre-workout, the creatine that you take is not going to help that workout. But creatine over time will build creatine phosphate stores within the muscle, which is a anaerobic energy resource during high intensity efforts for the first few seconds. But it takes time of supplementation to build up and saturate the muscle with the creatine. So the best time to take it is the time in which you're going to take it on a regular basis, in my view. Compliance is probably the most important factor here.
All right, so you touched on so many good points in there with creatine. And the first part was definitely that you need to be compliant for taking it and letting it actually build up in your muscles. I think a lot of people don't think of it that way. I think a lot of people think, okay, if I take it while I'm working out, it's going to act like a pre-workout. Well, that's totally not the case. The other thing which you touched upon, which I think is really interesting, hoping you just dispel that myth too, which you did in your last answer, that creatine is found in food. So I know a lot of people say, okay, creatine is synthetic, creatine is a steroid. I'm not taking creatine because it's not safe for me. So can you just dispel that myth a little bit?
No, creatine is actually made within your body. Most of it is in your skeletal muscle. It's made from 3 amino acids. The liver and the kidneys are involved. So even, the food sources for creatine are just like where it's mostly found in people, which is our meat. That's where you're going to get most of the creatine in your diet. And that's animal meats are your best sources. So when you if a dinosaur came along and just gobbled us up, that, Tyrannosaurus Rex may be thinking, well, I just got a couple of grams of creatine there, just in the food sources. But the difference is that, the efficacious level for athletic performance seems to start, at a higher level than what the diet tends to provide. So typical diets may provide one for an omnivore, for an omnivore, I may get a gram and a half, maybe 2 grams on a heavy meat day in my diet, but efficacy over time will be somewhere around 5 grams for me on a regular basis, on an average basis. And that's the other thing about creatine too, is that if you miss a day or if you miss 2 days, it's okay just to pick right back up, because you'll dip down a little bit in your stores, but then once you start taking it, it just comes back up. So don't panic if you go on vacation and, oh my gosh, I forgot my creatine. 3 days later, just get right back on it. Or you can double your intake for a couple of days and just sort of counterbalance a little bit. But that's the neat thing about it is, it's like putting $1 in your bank account every day, and soon you'll get to 100. But if you miss a couple of days in there, it may take you 107 days to get the $100 in your bank account.
That's a really, really great explanation. And I think it also gives us a little bit of relief, because I know sometimes, if I, like you said, go on vacation, forgot some of my Supps, and then, you're just like, well, I stopped taking it for 5 days. I'm not going to take it anymore. So I think that's a really good point, that you just get right back on the wagon and, just the compliance of it. So you talked a little bit about like creatine, but also like higher creatine intakes with supplementation. Can you talk a little bit about dispelling the truths and myths about higher protein intakes now?
We know a lot now about, higher protein intakes and protein safety and so forth. Over the last, I'd say, decade, there's been a lot of good review papers that have covered this, meta-analysis and so forth. And it generally, for any individual, for people who are not compromised in any organ that is involved in properly processing the nitrogen that comes off of amino acids or something like that, it seems to be fine. There doesn't seem to be any concern whatsoever. And in fact, there's actually one review that was done by the National Osteoporosis Foundation that, in their review, they actually found that higher protein diets did not lead to any deficits within the skeleton. On the other hand, there were a couple of places within the skeleton where they found the bone to be at an advantage. So, with regard to bone, it seems to be okay. It's not damaging to the liver. It's not damaging to the kidneys, does not cause acidosis in the blood. It doesn't shut the kidneys down the way that, some people think about it in a very primitive way to think about that. But it is important to recognize that, if somebody is in, kidney failure, higher, a reduction in your protein intake is a good idea, because the kidneys are a primary means for ridding that nitrogen that's coming off of it. But the same is true, you got to limit sodium and potassium and all these other things that the kidneys have to work hard to regulate as well. So kidney disorders, are problematic in a lot of different ways beyond just protein. But generally for healthy individuals, higher protein intakes, 2 grams per kilogram body weight, 2.5, even 3, doesn't really seem to be a problem. And I think another thing that's important to, when you think about where that sort of stacks up as part of the daily caloric intake, you got to remember that as part of the Food and Nutrition Board's DRIs and, all these recommendations that come out of, that body, the acceptable dietary macronutrient range, or is it the acceptable macronutrient distribution range? That's what it is 10 to 35% for protein. So even when you get to 2.5 and sometimes 3 grams per kilogram body weight, you're still not outside 35%. Now, for somebody who's more athletic and their caloric intake is going higher, even 2.5 times the, the 2.5 times the RDA for protein still may only be about 25% of total calories. So, there's a perspective there that's important to keep in mind, that, even within those recommendations, that even that higher upper end range of 35% still seems to be okay. So I think it's easy for us to dispel the idea that protein is not safe. We cover this in the International Protein Board. It's one of our protein matters. So if you go to the internationalproteinboard.org, you can read the article. You can see how the consortium of global protein experts sort of weighed in on this topic. And, and the question was posed that whether or not they thought that, two times the RDA was problematic for the human body, the kidneys and so forth. And they overwhelmingly said, no, it's not for otherwise healthy individuals.
So I think really, really great answer. And I think that all gives us, a level of comfort knowing that these world-renowned scientific bodies are telling us that yes, higher protein is fine. You should actually be having higher protein, as you mentioned before, if you're training, if you're, just being really active, because it will benefit you in so many ways. So I think with all those great responses, I think all of our viewers now can probably be experts in sports nutrition, Dr. Wildman. So I will put the links for the International Protein Board, and also the link for your website, thenutritiondoctor.com, in the comments below. So hope you guys all got a lot out of this. I sure did. These are all products that we take on the daily. A lot of us are working out on the daily. So this is, really great information. And if you guys have any other questions, either about sports nutrition, or if you want to see another podcast with more sports nutrition topics, please let me know, and feel free to also reach out to Dr. Wildman at thenutritiondoctor.com. So that said, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Dr. Wildman. And, as always, you're always such a breath of knowledge.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I will, just give a shameless plug here. The Nutritionist is formatted in a question and answer format. And it's meant to kind of simulate, like if you did sit down with a nutritionist and you said, what does vitamin C do? Or how much protein do I need? And, how do my kidneys work, or whatever? That's the way the book is written. So I do encourage, you can go to thenutritiondoctor.com, or you can pick up The Nutritionist, Food, Nutrition, and Optimal Health, and get a lot of those basic core answers that really, help you build your foundation of nutrition information. We're all scientists, at our very core. We're curious. We ask questions. I mean, that's what keeps us going. Our zest and our quest for knowledge and application. So, please reach out if you have any questions. And it's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And I hope all of you guys have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.